you get into something like yield curve control, where the Fed is the buyer of last resort. They monetize the debt, which leads to hyperinflation, ultimately, which leads to much higher interest rates. And that's the problem. If we weren't the world reserve currency, if we weren't reliant upon so much in the way of foreign investment into our treasury market in order to finance our debt, which is becoming very large. And not only that, when you talk about the need to come up with over 10 trillion in bond sales, every single year for the next several, just to finance the debt that is coming due and the debt that we have outstanding, to keep the lights on, it becomes very concerning. Who's going to buy our bonds? And that's when the weaponization of the bond market and the sanctioning of countries really starts to muddy the waters, because not only are you looking at an asset like the 10-year treasury that has, I would argue, underperformed. I mean, gold has doubled the performance of the 10-year treasury for the last 25 years, if you look at it over that span of time. And it doesn't have the counterparty risk that we've seen with the 10-year treasury, or with the treasury market in general, rather, where the United States, if they feel that we don't align ideologically and we don't like what you've done, we'll take your money, or the European Union for that matter. So the West has proven that they will, that the treasuries can be weaponized, and that if you're on the wrong side, well, then you'll get it confiscated and maybe even given to the country you're in the midst of a war against in the form of weaponry. That's a line that's very difficult to come back from. So when you add into it weaponization, sanctions, inflation, who the hell wants to hold our treasuries? Why not hold something like gold, which has doubled the performance of the treasury, has no counterparty risk, and if it's in your possession, cannot be confiscated? That's why you're seeing the central banks, on one hand, buy so much in the way of gold, because it's an asset with no counterparty liability that has outperformed the treasury. And you would think that a country that would really want to continue to be the world reserve currency would cling to the privilege and do all we could to foster confidence in this country. And the things that we've done over the last 4 years are contrary to that. And that's why I say that the current administration, now Trump isn't in yet, he's the president-elect, but the current administration, the Biden-Harris administration, in my mind, has done more to destroy this country than any external foe could have ever have done. And there's a lot of rebuilding that needs to be done. But, the issue with a lot of this, Anthony, is that for 15, 20 years of suppressed interest rates, when you mess with Mother Nature and you step on interest rates, you create distortions in asset prices. You create misallocations in resources and capital. And you have markets that are at all-time highs in stocks and real estate. And now we're going to lower rates again. This is creating more of the same issue. Trump wants a lower dollar and lower interest rates. Well, that's all great, but that's not what it takes to fix the problem, as far as I'm concerned. So it's the opposite. That's what got us into this problem to begin with. So at some point, you have to address the issues. And when you take out of the equation the foreign investment from the traditional centers of countries that were buying our treasuries and funding our standard of living, well, then it becomes a much bigger problem. Those countries are China selling treasuries, Japan is selling treasuries. These countries that have been holding our treasuries, Saudi Arabia, they don't want to do that anymore, and I don't blame them. So it becomes a bigger problem. How do you finance the debt problem, especially when you want to lower taxes? Where does the money come from? The BRICS currency says just gold. It doesn't. Originally, it was a basket of commodities, but they say the unit token, the white paper, says a basket of 40% gold in kilobar form that is deliverable upon request. In a basket, 60% of BRICS plus currencies with not any more than 30% of any one currency being in that basket. It's just gold, and that makes sense. I mean, gold was reclassified by the Bank of International Settlements in 2019. There's the BIS again, as the world's only other tier one reserve asset. And if you look, and that's next to US dollars and treasuries, but if you look at all of the the gold accumulation and repatriation by the central banks of the world, it makes good sense. And that's why a lot of people believe gold will be revalued at a much higher level. That's not pie in the sky. It's held in foreign central bank balance sheets in an account, can't make it up, called the gold revaluation account. The head of the Dutch National Bank keeps saying we should revalue our gold. It's still valued at $35 an ounce, the old Bretton Woods price, and it can't offset liabilities. They want to change the rules. They want to jack gold way up and offset the liabilities on their balance sheet with the price of gold and peg it to a new system. As crazy as that sounds, Cynthia Loomis, the senator from Wyoming, said the same thing at the Bitcoin meeting in Tennessee not too long ago, right after Trump spoke, saying, yeah, I would consider building a strategic Bitcoin account for the United States. She gets up on stage and says, I'm creating a bill to float to Congress that will revalue the gold held by the Federal Reserve on behalf of the U.S. Treasury to a level high enough to where we can take a portion of those funds and buy the Bitcoin for the strategic account. It wouldn't surprise me if they revalue gold, and it wouldn't even require congressional approval. Janet Yellen could just tell Jerome Powell, here's what the price of gold is, and anyone that wants to sell it to us, to the U.S. Treasury, other nations, will pay them X for it. Every $4,000 increase in the price of gold equates to $1 trillion free and clear to the U.S. Treasury general account. You know, as crazy as this sounds, why not put gold at $130,000 an ounce? A Bitcoin can go there. People don't think twice about that. What do all the central banks own? Gold. What have they all been buying? Gold. What have they all been bringing home? Gold. Would it behoove them all to have gold much higher, that they could offset their liabilities? Sure, it would. It's almost a form of a reset now. It would create a lot of inflation and would have consequences to it. But if we put it at 130,000, it just like that would offset our 36 trillion in liabilities. As crazy as that sounds, over my shoulder is President Roosevelt. He did something similar. You know, gold was money back then in 1933. Everyone owned it, but he confiscated it and then devalued the dollar by 40% immediately, and gold went from 20 to 35, just like that. And that reliquefied the entire treasury. The same thing could happen here. And in a world where all of these countries have been buying gold, look, if you talk about a system, so you already have the former president of Brazil and the head of the new development bank saying, yeah, we're going to peg it to gold. Look at the IMF. They came out with a report last year saying gold as a international reserve currency, a barbarous relic no more, ? And then you have Kristalina Georgieva, the head of the IMF, saying a CBDC not pegged to something is fiat. Well, what would you peg it to? Gold. They're using a 40% pegging. That's what the Swiss used, before they delinked it from their constitution. That gives you 60% monetary maneuverability, but you have to peg gold at a much, much, much higher price. So yeah, could they do it? Could they revalue gold? Sure, they could. And that is what the price is. I mean, in China, the price of silver has been $4 higher than in the West. Is that what the price is? Sure, if you can deliver it there. But if globally gold is then set at a much higher price, it offsets the liabilities on the balance sheets that is then used to peg to a new system with a marriage between blockchain technology and the price of gold, so that you're showing immutability and veracity for the whole world to see, have it independently audited. Sure,